This is my ultimate guide to making canvas panels. Everything I learned about making canvas panels is in this video. I make panels from hardboard, flat Gessobords, aluminum panels, and Gator board, which is very lightweight. This 16 by 20 panel only weighs 13.5 ounces, which is great for painting outdoors. I also make a 24 by 36 canvas panel from a Cradled Gessobord, and I varnish the edges with a varnish that's made from the whey that's left over from cheese making. I also use gesso and muslin to make a panel. I use 3 different adhesives, and at the end of the video I conduct an adhesion test. I include tips on which tools I find useful for smoothing out the canvas. So let's get started. This is hardboard. You can make canvas panels out of it, but first you have to seal it. So I'll open it up. You want to seal this first to create a barrier between the canvas and the panel. Golden used to recommend the GAC 100 for sealing the panels, but now they find that the gloss medium works better. You can still use this, but if you have a choice, use the gloss medium. This label might look a little different because it's older. As a side note, if you want to skip this step, you can use Gessobord instead and you won't have to seal it. I'll do that in the next section. So all you do is pour some of this on there and brush it on. I make sure I get some around the edges too, so those are sealed. I have this on a silicone mat so I can protect my desk with it. You can just let that dry on its own, but you can also use a hairdryer to speed that up. That's dry, and you'll notice that it dried clear. It's usually cloudy when it's wet, but it dries clear. Now for the second coat. This is just a lid from an oat container. I use these as disposable pallets. These lids make it easy to get any leftover medium back into the bottle. Now that this is dry, we can go on to the next step and mount the canvas to the board. I've been using this prime canvas from US Art Supply, and it seems to work pretty well. You can use whatever canvas you prefer, but I do find it's easier to use prime canvas because it saves a step. When this is done, I'm going to trim the canvas at the edge, so I don't need that much extra space around the outside of it. So I have my canvas. You want to turn it so the gesso side is facing down. For the adhesive, I'm going to use the soft gel from Golden. It flows a little bit better so you can smooth it out. So you want to have your brayer handy so you can smooth this out after you apply the gel to the board. So you just quickly brush it on both surfaces, and you want to work kind of quickly so that it doesn't start drying up on you. You want to make sure you don't get any of these little bits of dried gel on the canvas because that'll create a lump. The reason why I apply it to both surfaces is because this canvas is rather absorbent, and I want to make sure I get a good bond. It helps to put a little extra at the edges because that's where you end up having lifting problems. So you just turn it over and press down. You can use a brayer like this to work out any bubbles. These are used for applying tinting film to windows, and it also works pretty well too. You want to make sure the edges are pressed down firmly. If you need to, you can apply a little bit more gel underneath there and then press it back down. It helps to look at it from an angle to see if there's any bubbles, and you want to work them out before it dries. When you're satisfied that there's no bubbles in there, you want to stack some boards and some weight on top of it and let it dry. I usually let it dry overnight. You might be able to get away with a couple of hours. So once it's dry, you can just turn it over and trim off the canvas. Here's what it looks like when it's cut down. It has a nice clean edge and the canvas is nice and flat. In the next section, I show you how you fold the canvas around to the back of the panel. Most of my canvas panels are made from Gessobord, and that's because it saves me a step. I don't have to seal it first, and I could just glue the canvas down and get started. Gessobords are sealed with Archiva Seal, and that prevents substrate-induced discoloration. And then they apply a coat of gesso to the top, so there's no need to seal it first. Here's the Gessoboard. It's 8 by 10 inches. And these Liquitex freestyle brushes work pretty well for spreading out the gel. I usually load up the brush with a lot of gel and just spread it across. You want to make sure you get enough on the edges so that the canvas doesn't peel up. I also put some on the canvas. So you carefully take the board, flip it over onto the canvas, press it down a little bit, and then I flip it over. So you want to work from the center and then work the air bubbles out and go off the edge a little bit. It's kind of hard to see, but there's some lumpy areas, and I'll work that out with the brayer and then maybe even the scraper. It's one of the reasons why I use the soft gel. If it's too thick, you'll have a hard time smoothing it out. I think a stiffer squeegee like this does help to remove some of the roller marks. Yeah, that looks smoother. If there's any excess gel on the outside, you could just scrape it off with your spatula or a piece of cardboard. I made a bunch of these, and you want to dry them under pressure, so I stack them on top of each other, put a board on top, and then weigh it down. I usually let it dry overnight or even 24 hours. Then I'll come back and trim them down. Instead of just trimming it along the edge, you can also fold the canvas over and glue it down in the back. And I'll show you how you do that now. First I trim up the outside edges so they're even. The issue you might have with folding this around the back is that gets really thick in the corner. It's like 3 layers of canvas, and sometimes it sticks out beyond the edge. So the way that you eliminate that is you cut a notch in the corner. You could cut it at a perfect 90 degree like this, but I think it helps if you have a slight angle so that when you fold this down, the flap won't hang over the edge. So there's that corner. I'll do the other 3. You don't have to draw it, you can just eyeball it. I'll just use more of the soft gel to glue the edges. I like to start with the long edges first, fold those down, and then I do the short edges after that. I'll put some on the board too, just so that there's enough adhesive on here. I wear gloves just because it's kind of messy. You get acrylic gel all over your hands. It might take a minute or 2 for this to tack up. Just keep pressing it down. These 2 edges are glued down, so I'll do the shorter edges now. You can have to work a crease into it so it stays put. It might help to press it against the table like this, and then fold it down. And just hold it for a minute. So just press this final edge down, drop it down, and then put a weight on top of it. Just let that dry for a little while and it should hold pretty well. I let that dry overnight, and here's the finished panel. Thinner canvas is easier to fold around to the back. Later in the video I demonstrate how to do the same thing with muslin, which is much thinner. Let's make a large canvas panel. This is a 24 by 36 inch Gessobord, and it has an 1.5 inch cradle along the sides. And that's just so that it has more support and it doesn't warp. I'm using masking tape that's made for delicate surfaces to protect the wood edges of this panel. I'm going to trim the canvas at the edge of the panel, so I don't want the glue to create any stains on the wood. First I cut down the canvas larger than the Gessobord, and I trace the outside dimensions of it with a pencil. That will give me an idea of how far I need to spread the acrylic gel. I like to brush off the back of the canvas to remove any lint or debris that could create lumps underneath the canvas. It's helpful to use a large brush to spread out the gel because you'll get it done faster. As I spread the gel around, I'm trying to mash it into the texture of the canvas. Then I spread a layer of gel onto the Gessobord. I'm trying to work quickly here so that it doesn't dry out. And make sure there's enough gel along the edges and corners so there won't be any problems with lifting. I place the canvas on top of the Gessobord and slide it into position. At first, I just use my hands to press it down and move the bubbles out from the center to the outside edges. A brayer will help, and I also like using these plastic squeegees. As a final check, I run my hand along the edges to make sure they're sticking to the panel. Once I'm satisfied that it's smooth out, I place a board on top and weigh it down. You can use whatever you have laying around. I let this dry overnight, and then I place it face down on a cutting mat. That way I can trim around the outside with a utility knife. If there's any extra gel that leaked out the sides, the tape helps prevent it from sticking, so you can just push it back like this, and then cut around it. Here's a good example. Some of the gel spilled over the side, and this tape will just peel it right off. I wasn't able to cut close to the edge, but now that the tape is gone, I can get in there with the utility knife and trim it up nice and clean. This is a gloss varnish that's made from whey that's left over from cheese making. It's water-based and low VOC, so it doesn't have a harsh smell like solvent-based varnishes. I use a 1-inch flat brush to brush it onto the sides of this Gessobord. And make sure to cover the Gessobord itself. I let the first coat dry for a couple of hours and then lightly sanded it with 220 grit sandpaper. 2 coats seems to work well, but you can do 3 if necessary. Here's what it looks like when it's done. I like how it brings out the grain of the wood. And I like how the panel creates like a dark brown pinstriping around the outside. I've been experimenting with these sheets of aluminum composite material, and you can make canvas panels from them. In this demo, I'll be using the Podge paper adhesive, which, according to Podge, is supposed to be acid-free. This is an 8x10 aluminum panel. This brand is Alumicop, but Dibond also makes them. The core of it is 1/8 inch polyethylene, which is basically plastic, and the outside of it is aluminum. When you first get these, you want to be careful handling it because the edges are kind of jagged and the corners are sharp. So you need to peel off this plastic. One side is brushed aluminum and the other side is smooth. So this does look shinier compared to this side. I'm going to sand the edges of this so they're smoother. And I have this wet dry sandpaper. I like this sanding block because you can cut this into 4 sections and it fits it perfectly. The way that you open this up is you hold these together and pull up on the red piece. Then you slide the paper into the open side and press down to secure it. This is wet dry paper, so I'll spritz some water on here to keep the dust down. And then I'll flip it over and do the other side. So there's a bunch of fingerprints on here and you're supposed to degrease it with isopropyl alcohol. But I thought that you could use dish soap and a microfiber cloth to do the same thing. And I contacted someone from Dye Bond and they agreed that it would work. So I'll just spritz it and put a little bit of dish soap on here. You can see that cleaned that right off there. I have this leftover scrap of canvas and it should be enough to cover this panel. I'm going to cut this at the edge of the panel, so I don't need that much scrap around the outside. This is the brushed aluminum side, and that's the side you want to apply the glue to. The other side is smooth. I'll brush some of this onto the canvas side first, and then I'll apply it to the aluminum panel. Once the panel is coated with glue, you can lift it up and turn it over onto the canvas. Press it down so that it has good contact with the gel. And when you turn it over, you want to make sure you don't get any glue on it. And then you can use a brayer to smooth it out. This corner was lifting slightly, so I put more glue at the edge. When you're happy with how it's smoothed out, you can put a board on top and weigh it down. I let the Mod Podge dry overnight, and now I can cut it down. If you get some glue stains on the back, you can wipe it off with a damp rag. Here's the final panel. It's super rigid and it should never expand or contract. One thing I don't like about painting outdoors is having to carry around a lot of heavy gear and extra panels. The weight of my gear is always a concern, so I'm looking for ways to make things lighter, especially when I work at larger sizes. One solution I have is to use Gator board. So this is a 16 by 20 inch canvas panel made from Gator board, and it only weighs 13.5 ounces. Gator board might look like foam board, but it's much more rigid. And that's because the outer layers are wood fiber that are impregnated with resin. This time I'm going to use the Lineco PVA glue, which is supposed to have a neutral pH. I cut the canvas down and traced the size of the Gator board onto the back of the canvas. You want to make sure to remove any sort of lint or debris so you don't get lumps underneath it. Once you have the canvas cut down, you can spread the glue out on the back of the canvas. Then you can spread it onto the board itself. If you have trouble seeing where the glue is, you can hold it up to the light so you get a reflection on it. That way you can see if you missed any spots. I like to go over the edges again just to make sure that they're coated. Once you're confident that you have enough coverage on there, you can turn it over and press it down onto the canvas. It helps to clean up the extra glue so you don't get it onto the front of the canvas or even on the back of the canvas. It can start to look messy. Carefully turn it over and then smooth out the canvas with the brayer and plastic squeegee. Thinner canvas is easier to fold over to the back, but it has a tendency to wrinkle. It would have helped to cut the flap shorter. I cut a notch to make the corners easier to fold over. All you need to do is coat the flaps with some glue and fold them over. It might take a little bit of effort to get these flat, but I find that the plastic squeegee helps me to flatten out any wrinkles. I like to use my thumbs to pull the canvas tighter. That just ensures that the canvas is in contact with the board all the way around. You might find that the Gator board bows a little bit with the moisture, but once you put some weights on there, it'll dry flat. Once it's dry, you have a nice lightweight panel that's easier to travel with. Muslin's a super fine canvas-like material. It's much thinner and it's less expensive. Muslin's so lightweight you wouldn't want to stretch it because you'd be able to see through it. But it works on a panel because you glue it down and the rigidness of the board will help support it. I figure the panel's 8 inches wide. If I go maybe 10.5, 11 inches, that should give me enough room to wrap it around the back. So I'll just make a little cut at the end here. I should be able to rip it all the way down. I don't normally use gesso as an adhesive, but in this case it allows me to glue the fabric down and prime it at the same time. In any other instance, I would use the soft gel or a PVA glue. So you start out by applying a coat of gesso to the board. You don't want to go too thin on this because this is what's going to hold it down. So then you take your muslin, make sure there's no threads underneath it, pick off any lint or threads. Then you use your hands to flatten it out. It's so thin that all the wrinkles should come out as you press it down. Next you want to squeeze out some gesso and really work this in there. I go beyond the edge. You want to push that down with the bristles of the brush. Work it in there because this is the glue that holds it down. I go about maybe 1/2 inch around the outside because that's going to fold around the back and I want it to be white. Just smoothing it out and then I'll let that dry for a few hours. I'm going to trim it so there's maybe 1/2 inch extra around the whole thing. I'll do that on the other 3 sides and then I'll glue it down. I'll just brush on some of this soft gel onto the flaps, maybe a little bit on the board, and just fold it over. Just press it down until it sticks. You just go and do the other edges. And just press it down, make sure all the edges are sealed. And maybe it'd be a good idea to store it with some weight on there so that the flaps don't come up. So you got a nice clean edge. I thought I would do a section on different types of adhesives and what their benefits are. So I've tested out these 3 different adhesives and they all perform pretty similar, although the soft gel is much more permanent. And I'm not sure which is better, like if you want to have something permanently adhered or you want something that's reversible, so if there's a problem with the panel in the future, you can remove it. If there are any art conservationists watching this video, feel free to leave a comment below and let us know what you think about this. This is PVA glue and this is PVA glue with a few extra ingredients. I bought the paper version of Mod Podge because their website said that it's acid-free. And the Lineco is a neutral pH adhesive. They both work pretty similar. So the reason why you want the soft gel is because it's easier to smooth out. If you were to use the regular gel, it's a little bit too stiff. It makes it more difficult to smooth it out with a brayer. So use the soft gel or one of these PVA-based adhesives. So I made some test samples. This one has Gesso, Mod Podge, and Golden soft gel. So let's try and rip these off and see how well they stick. It's on there pretty good. It's taking quite a bit of effort. Try the Mod Podge. It's about the same, maybe a little bit easier. And then the soft gel, that's definitely harder. It's peeling off, it's sticking so well, it's peeling off the gesso. So I would say the soft gel works the best. The wood actually gives out before the glue does. Now I'm not sure which is actually the best solution, because if you needed to remove a painting from a panel, you could do it with these other ones. But if you really want to know what the strongest adhesive is, it's the gel. Now that you know how to make canvas panels, you can learn how to frame them by watching my picture framing tutorials. Please like this video and subscribe if you found it useful. Thanks for watching.